Just a few short weeks ago, a massive winter storm struck many states across the South, causing widespread disruption and blackouts in Mississippi, Louisiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. But the storm held its best blow for Texas, which bore the brunt of the storm. Large swaths of the state's residents not only lost electricity and heat, but were forced to boil water as water treatment plants failed and taps ran dry. One of the hardest hit areas was Fort Hood and the surrounding communities. Joining us today is Fort Hood Garrison Commander Colonel Jason Wesbrock, who's going to discuss how events unfolded on the ground and how the base and its neighbors banded together to weather the storm. Colonel Wesbrock, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today, Mac. Great to see you guys. And just real quick, for those not familiar with Fort Hood, we sit along the I-35 corridor between Dallas and Fort Worth. We have about 38,000 soldiers stationed here with 52,000 family members. We support a population of about 500,000 people. And most of our population, 77% of those assigned, actually live in our surrounding communities. So the majority of our families and soldiers don't live on the installation. Now we have 4 maneuver brigades here, the 3 Armor Brigade combat teams in the 1st Cavalry Division and the 3rd Cavalry Regiment, which is the most of any Army installation. And we're one of 2 active mobilization and force generating installations for the Army. So routinely, day in, day out, mobilizing and demobilizing our National Guard and Reserve forces as they deploy and return.
Well, Colonel Wesbrock, before we start, let me ask you something. How's the weather right now?
Weather right now, a little overcast, but you wouldn't believe that we were having single-digit temperatures just a couple weeks ago. Temperatures the last couple of days have been in the 70s and maintaining pretty strong right there in the 70 degree range.
That's downright balmy compared to a few weeks ago. Well,
we're out running the shorts now. What can we say?
Well, I want to let you know this is a story we've been following for a long time. Well, past week, I guess. So we're really glad that you're here today. There's a lot to unpack, so I'll start at the beginning. As it became clear that this store was inbound, what types of preparations were you able to make? Did you have time to react and get set?
We did, and so when a winter storm comes into Central Texas, usually the SOP, the standard operating procedure is wait till 9 o'clock the next morning and everything will melt and everything will be back to normal. So we kind of went that direction initially. Our schools on post belong to the Killeen Independent School District. So whenever we see winter weather coming in, we're in close coordination with them to make sure whatever they're going to do, we're kind of matching that so the soldiers can take their kids to school or get home. Our Directorate of Public Works was able to get out to some of our motor pools where we typically see pipes burst in really cold weather, and they were able to turn off water there. And then our privatized housing partner, Lend-Lease, and here locally, Fort Hood Family Housing, were able to get around and winterize some of the unoccupied homes. And we had a strong media push early on to encourage our soldiers and families of the actions they should take here in Central Texas to help prepare themselves for the cold weather.
Colonel Wesbrock, as the storm continued to develop and you were forced to adapt, you talked about that just a little bit. I'm really interested to know about the situation outside the fence, the communities that surround Fort Hood. I know there are a number of them. Were you able to coordinate your emergency response efforts with those communities? I know that's a difficult task, but also a really important thing, I know, to underscore in emergencies like this.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we did. So early on, we stood up our Emergency Operations Center here on Fort Hood, and we're doing daily assessments of what was going on the installation and adjustments we had to make. And part of that meeting is bringing in our counterparts from the local cities. So representatives from Killeen, Copperas Cove, Harker Heights, Bell County, and making sure we were synchronized across the different communities here to respond to the circumstances we're getting. And I think you just saw some pictures up on the monitor of some of our soldiers out with water buffaloes. As the water failed in the local communities, we were able to push out some water buffaloes and some generators to some of our local communities as well to help them get through the really difficult portion of the storm. And then as it continued on, the majority of the damage actually didn't occur during the extreme cold weather. It actually came about as things started to unthaw. And that's when we saw pipes bursting across the region.
Well, you said the weather is much better in Texas today, but has the base completely recovered? What's it look like today?
Yeah, so most of the services across the installation are back up to 100% under COVID rules, right? As far as the infrastructure and fixing everything, we're daily making incremental progress. In fact, the update I just saw a few minutes ago, we have most of the water back onto all of the facilities. There's still a handful of motor pools that we're working through. There were some buildings that were significantly damaged on the installation, barracks rooms, and we've got ongoing projects to fix those. We're making daily progress. But we're going to be recovering through this probably through the end of June before we get everything fixed back to where it was. But as far as services, water's turned back on. We actually never had to go to a boil water notice across the post here. There were targeted ones for where we had turned off water, and that was not the same in the local community.
Well, I know it's still early in the process, but what lessons learned have you kind of pulled from this entire episode, and what worked and what didn't work?
Yeah, so great question, and we've done an after action review already, and we'll continue building on that. I think when we look back at what worked, the coordination meeting that we did daily and incorporating our local city communities and bringing them all to the table so we could discuss what was going on and how we were going to react to that. That was beneficial. I think when we talk on a broader scope of the installation infrastructure, our utility privatization saved us. We didn't see any degradation really in our electrical grid or our natural gas grid. We did see some in the water grid, but we never truly lost water to the installation, which was great. And for the amount of pipes that we had that broke, our contractor that does water infrastructure on the installation, they were working through the storm, making repairs every single day, 24/7. I think the local communities, the support that we were able to give to them was good. I'd like to streamline that process a little bit better. There are rules that govern defense support to civilian authority, or DISCA, and there are safeguards for many of the right reasons, but being able to help our community partners and streamline that process, I think will pay us dividends in the future. And then mostly I would say that where we saw the biggest bang for our buck was in the renovation of barracks. Our renovated barracks performed exceptionally well. The ones where we had issues with pipes bursting and such were older barracks that we still need to renovate.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, if I was living in those barracks, I'd be like, oh no, I have to move out of this old crappy barracks. No. No, well,
there's probably some of that going on, but the good news is we didn't really affect wholesale barracks, right? It was individual rooms within barracks, and there was enough vacancies to move soldiers around. So they're not living in damaged rooms. They're in other healthy rooms that they can occupy.
Well, Colonel, we're so glad that you made it out. It was a tough, challenging moment, but we're glad that you made it out the way you did. So thank you, sir, so much for your time today. We hope you can get back on ADC Live, or we'll see you at hopefully the Installation Innovation Forum we've got coming up in November.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
We want to continue this conversation and look broadly at the issues of extreme weather, what they teach us about installation resilience and planning for climate-related events. Joining us are two experts on these topics. Jonathan Monken, who is a principal at Converge Strategies, LLC, a consulting company focused on the intersection of advanced energy and resilience. And someone we know well, John Conger, president of Converge Strategies and non-resident fellow at the Center for Climate and Security. Welcome to both of you, and welcome to ADC Live.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
It's good to be here.
Jonathan, let's start with you. What Texas and nearby states experienced a few weeks ago is a clear case of energy systems not being resilient. Taking a step back, help us understand how energy resilience relates to mission assurance for the military.
Yeah, I think really what it does is it highlights the fact that I think there's growing recognition of the fact that all DoD missions and those installations that they originate from are ultimately dependent on private infrastructure. And so when we see an event like this unfold and we see multiple cascading failures of energy systems, water systems, in some case communication systems, it really raises some significant issues about trying to understand what that means from DoD's ability to project force. Thank goodness in this particular instance, there are no bases in Texas that were certainly actively engaged in some type of force projection mission that would require their continued access to each of those infrastructure systems. But you can see, just highlighting Fort Hood related topics, how many resources need to be diverted to really support the community that surrounds the installation and really just provide those essential services to the soldiers and service members that live on the base.
John, over to you. Help us understand, how does this Texas experience kind of relate to the bigger climate change discussions that are happening now?
Well, it's not like you can attribute one storm to climate change any more than you can attribute a hurricane to climate change or anything like that. But what you do see is weather starting to get worse, and you see the odds changing. I think that a lot of the conversation about the Texas winter storm was that the odds of a winter storm on that scale have started to change, and so if you think the odds don't matter, you can go talk to your friends in Las Vegas. The odds matter. If something is more likely, we have to start preparing for it, and that changes the risk equation. I think that's going to lead to an increase in investments down the road. This administration that's come in wants to talk about climate, wants to focus on climate, and they also want to focus on infrastructure and investments. And you alluded to earlier in the program the infrastructure bill. And so when you combine climate as a priority and infrastructure as a priority, you start talking about resilience as a priority. And so I think they're going to start looking at what kind of investments they're going to need to make across the enterprise. It was interesting listening to the commander from Fort Hood. He talked about how utilities privatization saved him. The fact of the matter is that when you privatize your utilities on a base, that means you invest a lot of money on the utilities in the base and you upgrade everything. And that is probably something that they're going to want to take a look at.
Jonathan, back to you and continuing this discussion about investments. What's going on? What's the discussion in DoD? How are they looking to address these vulnerabilities?
So there's actually quite a bit of effort underway right now within the department to try and identify both the risk and overall severity of that particular risk, and then try and outline some of the broad strokes of what really needs to be done around it. So the Defense Science Board has a task force that's dedicated to this particular issue on defense critical infrastructure, really just trying to wrap their arms around how significant is the risk that we need to contend with. And so one of the biggest challenges is, until you have a full understanding of what risk looks like beyond the fence line, which is an area that the department doesn't currently have a great deal of visibility into, you really can't articulate a strategy for a combination of infrastructure investment, what you can do on the base to try and mitigate some of the potential consequences of the loss of these infrastructure systems, and then really trying to align these types of investment strategies that we're referring to here when we talk about the mechanisms that are available to the federal government to try and address it. The biggest challenge there is you have to do it with partners. And if you need a friend, it's too late to make one. So in this instance, early engagement with communities, and then also early engagement with these private utilities as to what these needs are, what types of requirements exist to maintain these mission assurance capabilities, and how risk does not stop at the fence line of the installation. It really bleeds right through it. And so we have to try and understand what a shared risk environment looks like if we really want to have a good chance at tackling it systematically to the point where we can get that risk at acceptable levels to the national security implications.
So, Jonathan, back to you. Help us understand what is being done to address these issues of resiliency nationwide, and how does this impact communities positively or negatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially what we're trying to do is, there's really a holistic approach right now. When you look at the transformation of something like the U.S. electric grid, the pace of change has increased dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years. There's been substantial changes to the generation mix that's out there that's providing services to communities and defense installations alike. And there's been a lot of effort that's been trying to focus on what we can do to achieve these community-driven outcomes of trying to understand that an event like what we saw in Texas, you may be faced with a really difficult choice of saying, well, I don't have enough energy to supply both the water purification facility and the local hospital. And making a difficult choice means that you have to understand what the consequences are. And there were multiple instances in Texas during that event where a hospital had electricity but did not have access to potable water, meaning that they were forced to evacuate the building. They could not treat patients without access to clean water. And so understanding where those trade-offs are, understanding what decisions, both in terms of investment in infrastructure and real-time operational decisions, really can have significant consequences when you talk about what it means to the community and the people that those life support systems are really intended to serve. And until you can effectively unpack those, you really can't address the risks. So right now what we're seeing is there's a lot of discussion around what's different about the Texas system, as an example, from a grid perspective than it is in other areas that are able to handle cold weather more effectively. What types of things are currently being done to try and bolster infrastructure, recognizing that that is certainly a cost that will be borne by some combination of ratepayers and taxpayers, depending on how ultimately those programs are structured, aligned, and ultimately implemented. So there's a lot of effort underway, recognizing that there are so many really significant events, everything from wildfires to the increase in frequency and severity of hurricanes and those types of events, coupled with man-made risks like cybersecurity. When you take all those things holistically, you understand that the environment is changing, infrastructure is inherently vulnerable, and actions need to be taken.
John, a quick question for you, because we're getting the wrap signal from our control room. We can't figure these things out overnight, but what is something that Congress could do right now that would move us in the right direction towards helping build installation utility resilience?
So what Congress can do right now is sort of fund and provide the resources that match the ambition of the department. When the administration comes forward with their FY22 budget, I think you're going to see a lot more desire for investment in resilience. They're going through these drills right now, and we'll see the budget in May. Todd alluded to a lot of the weapon systems puts and takes, but I think you're going to see a desire to invest in resilience from the department. They're going to shift some more resources there. What Congress can best do at this point in time, because they've done a lot to give authority, right now they're going to need to fund the newfound ambition.
Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us today. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with ADC Live.